Okay, so what we're going to do now is make our float rafts. Obviously our float rafts, we have to decide first of all what size pot we're going to use. The two common sizes is a 50 ml and a 75 ml. Now the 50 ml is actually the one we use on the farm the most. Okay, we do occasionally use the 75. Now the 50 ml, you save a lot on mix, on potting mix, because you use so little compared to that. Now the differences are, this I'll grow basil, lettuce, I'll grow chives, spring onion. In here, you'll probably look at growing maybe a tomato plant. The other thing you can do in here is actually grow 2 lettuces. So what some people do is if they're doing a mixed leaf lettuce pack, they'll do a red lettuce and a green lettuce, and then what happens, they cut it and they put it in a bag. Yeah? Especially if you're doing mixed bags and stuff. So my recommendation is pretty much stick to the 50 ml. You get more plants on a sheet, it's cheaper. So obviously if I'm going to use a 50 ml pot, it does change my planning and my dimensions on how I drill and how I map out my raft. You spend a lot of time developing the first raft because it becomes your template. Okay? The important considerations is obviously the size of my raft, but also you have to take into consideration a raft that is going to be placed next to it. So in this case, my rafts are going to run all the way up. This is 1.2 wide. I have to make sure that my lettuce here isn't sitting next to a lettuce here, that my spacing is consistent. Okay? Those are some of the things that you're going to have to think about when planning on how to drill your raft. So if we have a look up here on my sheet, I always find it helps to have it on paper before you start drawing on the raft itself. Here's my raft. It is 1.2 meters high. It is 0.6 meters wide. The important thing to consider is if I'm using float raft that is 30 dVA plus, so in other words the density is 30 dVA and above, I can go 2 centimeters from the edge. If I'm using low density float raft or polystyrene, then I must have 5 centimeters from the edge. And if it is low density, I have to use 50 ml thick board. This board that we're using here is 40 ml. Okay? It's 40 ml thick. And the reason we're using 40 ml is because it's high density, it's got good buoyancy, and obviously it lasts a long, long, long time. The other difference with board is you get extruded and you get expanded. Anyone remember which is better? Extruded. Extruded polystyrene, you don't see little balls. If you look in and you look close, you're not going to see little balls inside there. Okay, so let's get to planning. What are we going to grow? What plant are we going to grow? That's going to determine the spacing between our holes. Spring onion, high density. Mint. Our mint is at 20 centimeter spacing. What else? Peas. Typically my peas are, you can do peas on float raft, but anything that trellises, I don't recommend on a float raft because when you move the raft, it gets pulled out the water. I'd rather have them in the stone.
Strawberries?
Strawberries you can do.
What's a trellis?
Trellis. A trellis is something like a plant can grow up. Yeah, so tomato or a cucumber.
Lettuce and stuff are your most common ones.
Yeah.
Eh?
Okay, lettuce, very common, very easy one. Most people grow lettuce. So at the farm, we use 20 centimeter spacing for our lettuce, which means if you can picture the space between my holes, I need 20 centimeters between them.
But also now next to the 20 centimeters next to the next board as well now.
Correct, so you're going to have a plan on how that's all going to fit together. So the first thing that I do is I draw a boundary. And my boundary is my 2 centimeter boundary, which means I can't have a hole that eats into that boundary. Yeah? So that's the first thing that I'm going to do on my sheet. The second thing is, quite often what I'll do is I will mark my first hole is going to be the center of my first hole is going to be 20 centimeters from the edge. It's going to be from the edge. This boundary is to make sure that when I'm planning my next one, that it's not going to go over. So I know 20 centimeters from here is where I'm going to draw my first line. And I'll draw my lines out spaced 20 centimeters apart. Okay? Then what I'm going to do is be able to mark exactly where my holes go. And I'll know that all of them are 20 centimeters apart. Okay, that's the most common way of spacing your holes. However, if you stagger your holes and you do them diagonally, you're going to fit in a few more holes per square meter. For example, at the farm we're planting 29 per square meter. If you do standard spacing, it's 25. So it's 4 extra plants, money in the pocket. But if we're going to stagger them, what that means is I'm going to have a hole here and a hole here. And my spacing between the holes is 20 centimeters. The spacing between the holes is 20 centimeters. Does that make sense?
So how do you plot it? Do you start then this
Which
way?
means the distance between my two rows is not 20 centimeters because that's a longer line. Now, does anyone remember Pythagoras?
No.
Okay, back to school. Now, this is the moment in life you say, teacher, you want to phone your teacher. I'm using Pythagoras. I'm using it. I never knew what that thing would be used for, but I'm using it. The way that we use Pythagoras here is we draw a line down the middle, and we have a right angle. We know this is 20 centimeters. We know this is 10 centimeters.
Okay.
What we don't know is that length. Okay? What is the formula for Pythagoras? A squared equals b squared plus c squared, c squared. So a squared is the longer line. So that is A, and that is A. That is B, and that is C. So A squared minus C squared equals B squared. So the square root of A squared minus C squared equals B. Yeah? So the square root of A squared, 220 squared, minus C squared, 10 squared, equals what? So 20 squared is 400. Minus 10 squared is 100. Square root of 300 equals. Now, for those who don't know, you turn your calculator on your phone that way around.
And does what?
Hey. Hang on, I need to unlock it, that's why. Okay, so when you turn it sideways, you get a scientific calculator. Yeah? 300 square root of 17.3. Okay, 17.3 centimeters. So instead of being 20 centimeters apart, that is going to be 17.3. So what that often means is I'm going to fit an extra row on my raft because I'm saving that space every time. Obviously, your planning of your raft sheet has to be taken into consideration your system design, where your raft's going. how your raft's being placed. Are you on a multi-span DWC? In other words, you've got multiple sheets next to each other. Or is it a single row? In other words, I can have a plant right at the end and right at the end because all I've got is path space. Yeah? So that planning is really, really important to ensure that. So now we know that that's 17.3 and we know that the spacing between the holes is 20. We can then go back and we can now have another go at our sheet. All right? We know we've got this border line, which is 2 centimeters. So I will still, for my first hole, you have two options. You either go right in the corner, you know that that's 2 and that's 2, and then from there you can start mapping. Okay? So you know that that's the first one you're going to do. Does that make sense? So I know that from here to here, if this is a 5 centimeter pot, that is 2,5 centimeters from there to there. So 2,5 plus 2, I know that that distance is 4,5. And 4,5 is where my first row is actually going to start. Here, that I also know is 4,5. So on my sheet, I'm going to mark 4,5. And here, oh, I'm marking, I've done inches. Good point. Okay. 4,5 is there. Four comma 5 is there. 4,5. Just so I know, give myself a bit of spacing. And you can always do one on this side. And if you want, you can obviously draw your line.
Because it's your template, so.
This is my template, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so we know that the first hole is going to go where that mark is. Do we agree? Then from there, I am spacing what? 20. So I know there's my next one. There's my next one. And obviously I can't get an extra one on. So I know I'm going to get 1, 2, 3. So again, if you want to picture them, they'll look something like that. Then I know from the middle of this hole to the middle of the next hole is how long?
17.
If I stagger it exactly. Then I can do my next line. I can line it up. Looks about right. And I can draw my next line. And I know that that is 17.3 because my next one is going to be, and it's going to be somewhere over here, correct? So the question is, if I know that that is 4,5, how much further along is that hole going to be?
10 on, so it's 14.5.
It's halfway between. So remember, I've got that one there, I've got that one there. That is 20.
Yeah.
That is 10. So it's 10 plus 4.5. 14.5. So then I know my next one is going to come over there. And from there, I'm doing 20, 40. Okay? You're following? Now, a sanity check before you go any further is I do a measurement. What is that? 20. What is that? 20. And of course, what is that? 20. Yeah? So now it's quite easy for me to draw my lines spaced at 17.3 and do my markings, which I now know exactly where my first one goes and how to increase. Now obviously once I've done this template, the second template I'll probably do in reverse. So this hole here, so the pot that's over here, I need to make sure is 20, and actually it will work out that it will be if I start my next one on this side. You understand?
The same distance as this.
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool.
Okay.
The next one next to it needs to be.
Yeah,
Correct. And then this one here, because of the staggering,
It's going to be further.
so the staggering works beautifully to my advantage in this case because of putting them next to each other.
So say you were using the 75, you might have to adjust this to get
Yes.
the same distance across.
Correct. If I was using a 75, I'd adjust my slightly. But my spacing is usually center to center anyway of my plants.
If you do the one and you cut the holes up, could you just put the other one on top and use that same template to mark the holes?
Correct. So what we'll do is once we've got one template, you have a little bit of spray paint or something, you just mark your holes and then you just drill.
Yes.
Okay, let's just do one more line. So 17,3, just do our mark there.
Is there like parameters where you don't go more than 17 or less than 17, like 15?
It's all dependent on your crop. So every crop will have a spacing requirement.
But then where do we find the information? Whenever you want to grow gooseberries.
It's-
I'm giving
it's-
an example, but
Most of the time it's on the back of the packet.
oh,
In aquaponics, we go slightly denser. But you, as a good guideline, follow what's on the packet as a basis, if that makes sense.
Can you have a mixture of plants on one raft?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can. You can have a mixture, but typically we keep the same plant. Yeah, for harvesting. But like I said, you might have a green lettuce and a red lettuce. You might have a baby gem and a frilly lettuce. So you might mix your lettuces because you're doing mixed packs or whatever it is. Or if you've got a small system, you can grow multiple crops. You know, I could have some spring onion and some lettuce and the likes. And often what we'll do is we'll drill it at quite a high density, and we just might not use all the holes. Okay, but let's mark this one. So if you remember, that first hole was 4,5. So now I'm back to my original row, 4,5. And then from there, I'm going 20, 40, like that. Okay, and if I wanted to do a sanity check, 20, 20, and 20. All right, so now we're getting an idea. So we repeat that process all the way down to the end, and then what we'll do is now come to drilling. So when you're drilling your raft, you obviously use a drill. The easiest way is to get a drill and a hole saw. You will find that there's different types of hole saw. There's shallow hole saws and there's deep hole saws. This shallow hole saw, if I drill, is not going to quite make it through. So if you have a shallow hole saw, you'll have to drill, turn it over, and then finish drilling from the other side. Okay? The other thing you'll notice, so a deep hole saw allows me to go straight through. The other thing with a drill is a drill can go forward and a drill can go backwards. So when we're drilling in rafts, I always drill backwards against the groove. The reason I do that is because I get a much cleaner cut on my raft. Yeah? So, this guide here is the center of my hole, which will be there. So, what I'll do is obviously hold it slightly off. And if someone can just hold that sheet for me there. Cool. Obviously, if you want to do a test, you'll see the lip holds it nicely. If I was a little bit shaky, if you are too shaky, what happens is you actually make the hole a little bit too big. But it's good to just make sure that that pot doesn't fall through. You don't want to drill everything and then realize the holes are too big or something's gone wrong.
So a 50 mil would take a 50 mil also. The lip is not included in the 50 mil?
Exactly. The lip is always a little bit bigger than 50 mil. Okay, so you'll keep drilling. Maybe we'll do this one here.
And for new one.
A new hole saw.
Yeah, I see.
It's not.
It's
It's
bent.
a bit off. Yeah.
Yeah, it's bent. But
And what that can do, as long as it fits nicely,
Yeah.
it's fine. But if it makes my hole too big, I've got an issue. But as you can see, I'm starting to now create my raft and my template. It's worth spending the time on one to get it right for all of them. And I've often seen efficiency, people being up to 10% less efficient because they haven't drilled their rafts properly. And I've seen quite often people drilling 2 holes per instead of 3. But the other difference with the high density raft, because we're not losing 10 centimeters on the edges, we're actually getting quite a few extra holes on our system compared to the lower density raft, which adds up to at the end of the day. So the question is, which we've always debated, is what to do with these bobbins. And it's always been a bit of a, this is quite expensive. So a lot of people have noticed, but we've started putting these into our sump. Basically, we cover our sump with these. They float on the top, and that stops any evaporation of water, and it helps to keep my water insulated, especially in winter and in summer. Stops my water heating up or cooling down. So just an idea, but if you find any other ideas like fishing, buoys, or the likes, I'm sure that there's many purposes, but that's just one thing that we do with them, so we don't throw them away. All right, any questions on that? Yeah, all happy?
Will the polystyrene expand or shrink with water?
No, if it's good quality polystyrene, it doesn't absorb any water at all. Okay, it will stay as is. And if you look at any polystyrene or ISO board, it comes with a water resistance rating. So it'll say after how long, how much water will it absorb. Low density raft absorbs a lot of water, breaks very easily. And the other thing I like about the 40 mil, if you have a look, my pot is sticking just out the bottom, and that allows it to have access to some water, but not too much. If I was using very thin raft or very cheap raft and the whole raft is halfway underwater, too much of my pot's in the water, when that plant is starting or you've got a potting mix, it sometimes is too wet. All right, not a lot of tools needed, except your ruler and a pen and a drill and a hole saw. Okay, so let's get into our teams. Team A, Team B, there's 2 sheets here. Drills, hole saws, everything is around. Mark your template, and then when you're done, we'll obviously go put it into the DWC to make sure it fits. Okay.